Time now, 7:13.
Right, there have been many lows since the beginning of the Syrian conflict in March 2011. However, this week has been particularly shocking for people watching from afar.
The United Nations announced that the number of children forced to flee Syria has reached 1 million, describing the figure as a shameful milestone.
Overall, more than 1.7 million people have registered as refugees since the uprising started. And on Wednesday, as you know, there was news of a suspected chemical weapons attack on the outskirts of Damascus. The charity Médecins Sans Frontières says around 355 civilians were killed.
Altogether, the UN says that more than 100,000 people have been killed since the uprising began. So, with the Syrian government and opposition forces blaming each other, is it time now for the rest of the world to intervene? Let's discuss this with Middle East analyst Saka Al-Makhadhi. Good to have you with us, Saka. You've got an interesting view on specifically this alleged chemical attack because it was near Damascus, which we haven't seen much of the fighting focused on of late.
Well, that's right. There has been fighting in Damascus. Don't get me wrong. You know, the suburbs have been, on fire. But the centre for the battle of the future of Syria has been recently, at least, in the north. It's been in Aleppo, which is a divided city. It's been in Qusayr, which is a town near the Lebanese border, which is quite close to Aleppo. And it's been in Homs as well. But Damascus really has been spared the worst of the fighting in recent months. So it's very strange and it is, quite unusual location for this alleged chemical weapons attack to have taken place.
So what's your theory as to why the battle, the violence has escalated there particularly?
Well, I think the Assad regime has been keen to push what's going on incrementally. It's been keen to escalate the violence on a level that it wouldn't provoke international action. But I think what happened in Damascus was interesting timing because the weapons inspectors had just arrived in the city. And really, I think what the Damascus regime wanted to do was sow doubt and confusion in the eyes of the world. It wanted to tell the world, it wanted to make the world think, well, could it have been the rebels? It might not have been us. And that's the line that very clearly Russia and Iran have been pushing. They've been saying quite clearly that, no, this wasn't an attack by the regime. It was most definitely by the rebels.
The UN disarmament chief has now arrived in Syria. There is increasing pressure for inspectors to be allowed in, but time is of the essence here, isn't it?
Absolutely, it is. There's a 2 to 3 day window after a chemical weapons attack takes place for samples to be taken out of the country. Now, the UN weapons inspectors probably aren't going to get into the scene of the alleged crime within that window. But what has happened, which is very interesting, is that survivors of the alleged attack made it to Jordan, and they're able to provide samples to the international community which could prove one way or another whether it was a chemical weapons attack, not necessarily who committed it. And then also, of course, Médecins Sans Frontières, the international NGO, Doctors Without Borders, says that in its field hospitals in Damascus, some patients presented with symptoms that could have come from a chemical weapons attack. So all of these things are combining to force the hand of the world, and now we're seeing America having to ramp up the pressure because, it's been pulling back from taking any kind of action for the last 2.5 years. So by sending military assets into the region, it's doing the very minimum that it could do in these circumstances.
But the uncertainty that you speak about, the British, the Americans, the French all seem pretty convinced that it was the government that did it. Of course, there is a counterpoint to that. President Obama has spoken about this red line, and if indeed it's proved that President Assad has crossed that red line, as it's suspected he has before, is this now not a real test of Western resolve?
It is. And
of the United Nations. Well,
exactly. And President Obama has been, very keen to set this red line out and then shift the goalposts. So in the beginning, it was the red line is any use of chemical weapons. And then when there are allegations of the use of chemical weapons earlier this year, that goalpost shifted to a large-scale use of chemical weapons. And now it seems that the border is shifting again because, we're hearing the Obama administration say, well, we're not exactly sure who used the weapons and whether there was a chemical weapons attack. So with this evidence coming out of the country, trickling out of the country very slowly in the form of the survivors in Jordan and the Médecins Sans Frontières evidence from inside the country, I think, Obama's hand is being forced and he has to take some kind of action, and that's why we're seeing these decisive words from Obama and from William Hague in the last few days.
OK, Saka Al-Makhadhi, thanks very much. Good to have your thoughts.
It's 18 minutes past 7. You're watching Breakfast from BBC News, the morning's main stories.